Connection is key. Hey guys, welcome back to Crime Over Cocktails. I'm your host, Tiffany, and today I have guest Mechele Wingle.
Well, I want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. I find this is a very interesting topic, and I think people might really benefit from this where they probably never would have even thought of this.
Right. I do NLP. It's called NLP, which stands for Neuro-linguistic programming. And it's a way of reprogramming those ideas that kind of take over and we get through our understanding through our experience and things like that. Well, I start out years ago, probably about 2014, started to dabble in a little, just kind of hearing a little bit about like essential oils and things like that. And kind of, and things in my marriage, things were starting to get a little stressful, and it wasn't making sense. This person that I had known for so long. In fact, if I quickly tell the story, me and my husband were born on the same day in the same hospital. Like
really?
Just a few hours apart. Yes. And then my sister was living in Japan, and he was living in Japan when we were in high school, and they met and we're just talking one day, and she said, "Oh, you have my sister's birthday. You have the same birthday." So she came home and said, "You'll have to meet him. He's coming home, the end of this year. You should meet him sometime." Meanwhile, we were both starting our senior year of high school, and we ended up going to we ended up going to college for our senior year, and we actually met each other on our own and just said, "Oh, you're that person." Oh. So if there was any story that would act like it should have a happily ever after ending, it should be that story. But he was starting to have he was starting to have, it was just starting to, he just wasn't being himself. He was being very avoidant. You can go into attachment styles. He was being very avoidant. He was getting upset about things. He was struggling in his faith and all that. Everything just tore apart. Things just started to crumble in his life. And so I just kind of looked for answers. We were going to the doctor on a regular basis to get him some medicine. He was, very anxious and very depressed. And so we were on that trip, going from, and we had a great doctor, and it was very, very helpful, but it was something would be great, and then it would last a few months, and then it wouldn't be great. And we'd try a new medication, or we would up it or add a medication. And I think that went on for 5 years. But in about 2015, everything kind of took a dive, and my mom had passed away. My oldest child had moved out of the house. It was time to move off, leave the nest. And that just really kind of flipped a switch inside me, because things about my identity was going to change. My family was now going to never be different. It was just kind of this really hard thing to get to see him leave. And then shortly after my mom passed away, shortly after that, we found some sexual abuse with one of our children. And then my dad ended up getting remarried pretty quickly, and my best friend was diagnosed with cancer. So it was like bam, 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 all of these things. And you get to that point where you just think, I'll do whatever I got. I didn't care what I had to do. It was spiraling. It was really rough. And so I went to my very first Reiki session. I had a Reiki session, and that was helpful. Driving home from the Reiki session was, kind of a moment where I felt like I could handle what was before me. And within a month or two, I had signed up to take my own Reiki training, and loved that. And so I went all the way up there. I'm my official title in Reiki is a Karuna Master Reiki Master. Karuna Reiki Master is what it is. So I went as far as you can go in that, and I loved it. And I would recommend that training to anybody. It was really, really fascinating, and really kind of gave you the fundamentals about, these kinds of modalities. It was very well planned out and had like it taught it well, where sometimes they're just like, hey, here's what you do. That one was very methodical and taught the concepts and worked you through all the different pieces of metaphysical healing kind of a thing. And
sounds like you had a good teacher.
I did. I had a good teacher. I did Holy Fire is the name of the brand of Reiki, I guess it's called, and it's through the International Reiki. And it was really great. I really liked that. And then I did from that training, we kind of had this, she had what she called a Reiki retreat. And it was just all of her students from whatever year could come to this little 3-day retreat. And from there, I met a man who was getting ready to do a shamanic walk. He had been in a car accident in the early 90s. His wife and son were both killed. He himself had seen her on the other side, experienced that, had this amazing near-death experience. His name is Jeff Olson. If you look him up, his story is amazing. And when he was on the other side, he felt nothing but love and care and connection with everything. And you would think you would come home. And that's what's amazing about these experiences. You think you'd come home and then everything would just be beautiful in your life. But it kind of threw him for almost 10 years because it was so different than what he had been raised to think, was supposed to be like. There's supposed to be very distinct differences for different people who are doing different things. And he did not experience that. So through that 10 years of trying to wrap his head around the fact that he was worthy of love and understanding and connection, right? He had been kind of adopted through some Native American tribes and learned their shamanic ways. And they had came to him and said, it's time to gather a tribe and teach the people that are ready to come. And so I took that first shamanic walk with him, and it was a 9-month walk of just, to me, it just seemed like it tore everything down. I had to tear everything down to the bottom and build up what was mine to have, to really look at things. And I learned
8 months.
It was an 8-month. Yeah. Each month was a different, they call them rites. And you would think about the rites. For instance, the first rite is all about mother or the serpent, the serpent and learning the ways of the serpent, and the serpent goes into the dark. The serpent is always touching the earth, every part of their body. If the serpent touches the earth, and to be grounded to the earth. And it was a beautiful, to learn that, the native mythology and way of really connecting and being centered and at peace. But the other thing that the serpent does is it sheds its skin and lets it go. And so it was a month of letting go, and it was just on your mind every single day. And we'd get together, and it was just, so therapeutic to kind of let everything go, to recognize what you were holding on to. And even if that was whatever that was, but you all of a sudden shined a light on all that you were holding on to. And it just became this month after month building upon each other to kind of learn through all these rites. And very similar, you can lay that right on top of the chakra system. It was really kind of amazing how these ancient practices really speak the same symbolism. They might have different language, but they speak the same symbolism. And so it really worked well with all the stuff I had learned in Reiki and I'd taken it's a master energy healing certificate and all the same, very, very similar. So I began, after taking those things, began seeing clients. And then my partner, actually, who was my teacher in my Reiki teacher, we actually became business partners and started what we call the Wholeness Network. And the Wholeness Network is, the idea is almost like, it's like a Netflix for wholeness, for wellness. And our idea was sometimes, in between even my own sessions, sometimes you're just having a moment, and we have a library of videos to turn to. There's tutorials, so I have a bunch of tapping tutorials that you just, it's like, I'm feeling this feeling. Okay, put on that show and tap along and kind of work through it. We have a lot of meditations. We've got a lot of downloads for you to kind of look over and journal through things, whatever suits you. But it's just kind of like our online medical health kit for what we would do for ourselves, and wanting to pass that on to the world. So that is an amazing library. It's like $4.99 a month. We wanted to make it affordable so that, and you can have it on your phone. We are just getting it ready to be an actual app, we've been working on it for so long, and it'll be so great to be able to just have the app and click on it. And it's like, okay, what do I need? I need to hang out. And we have these beautiful things we call visual meditations. And that's the thing that I love is meditation. Sometimes people say, I can't meditate. There's no way I can't sit there and quiet. And I get that. So you turn on this meditation and you can watch it. You can close your eyes if you want to, and do your thing. But it's just kind of a way of, it's like a baby step into meditation or into mindfulness to just stop and just spend a few minutes. And by the time you're done watching a 5-minute visual meditation, I guarantee you feel a little more relaxed than you did before, So
I think we could all use that.
Right. It's so true. I mean, life gets to us, and that moves right into, trauma. So understanding trauma has been my last maybe 3.5 years journey. I've been trained in different trauma release techniques. I've done trainings with people, Peter Levine, who is the ultimate trauma person, Besser Vanderkolk, people like that to help really understand what trauma is. And so a lot of times I think in society, we kind of just think, somebody that has trauma, they had this big event that happened, this big, huge event, and it was impactful, and everybody would pull back and say, wow, that's a traumatic event. But really what trauma is it's really whatever our body's reaction is to something that overwhelmed it or was shocking to the system. It's part of the nervous system, and it's there in that moment, to help us in a moment, but it gets into the system and it just repeats and repeats and repeats. But there's this other side that I didn't know about. And then, and full circle coming back to my husband, we realized there's this thing we've learned with him that's called CPTSD, which is complex post-traumatic stress disorder. So what happens is that we have, like, it's where our nervous system is engaged over a long period of time. Instead of just one traumatic event, we've got, a lot of it. So you've got people who
boom, 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 boom.
Yeah. And what's interesting with him, most fascinating thing that I've learned about trauma is that your nervous system will register trauma to what didn't happen as much as what did happen. So for instance, there's a video you can Google it on YouTube, and it's called the still face experiment. And they take little babies and they ask their mom to play with the baby. You can watch the baby playing. And then they ask the mom to just turn into a still face. So she's not angry. She's not hitting them. She's not doing anything but just a still, just nothing face. And within 2 minutes, the baby is in a full on, it would be a traumatic response. It would be a traumatic response. So a lot of times what's happening in our busy world is we are still facing each other, and our bodies are registering these as a trauma. And it might not even happen at the time. The trauma is trying to get you somewhere else, but later it shows up. I have a great example. This was a traumatic event, but this explains how it goes. A few years ago, I was helping my niece with her wedding. She was getting married, and my sister was, we were putting the reception and all the decorations and all the little things that you put up. And so they had went on their way, and I had stayed behind to help clean up and, put the presents all in the car and that kind of thing. And so I was driving home late, probably about 40-minute drive late, like 1 a.m. And I was on the freeway, and all of a sudden I looked in my rearview mirror, and there was a car so close to my bumper, I couldn't even see the lights, and I had not seen it come up. And the freeway was empty, and I was in the very left lane. So there was plenty of room to go around me, but it scared me. So I slipped. I pressed on the gas to like, oh, let me get out of the way. You're just kind of this response to push on the gas. And sure enough, they just pulled out to the side of me. Yeah, it was so scary. Pulled out the side of me and just rode with me, and then I would slow down and it would slow down and I would speed up and it would speed up. I felt like I was in danger and didn't know what to do. And then luckily all of a sudden it just sped off and took off on a freeway exit and was gone. But of course I'm sitting there like breathing heavily, like terrified. It was scary. It was
that could have ended very differently.
Right.
So.
I didn't know what the intention was. I didn't know what was happening, but clearly wasn't just upset that I was going slow. Like there was some real
cat and mouse
dangerous. Yeah. So I went home and I, woke up my husband and I even got in the tub because I was just kind of shaking and stuff. And it was so scary. And this is a good lesson for me because I'd had my trauma training. So I told my husband, I says, I think I need to go back and ride that freeway again and kind of replay that. And then life got busy and I didn't. And so a year later, I'm opening up my phone. I turn on, pull up Instagram and there's my niece's happy 1-year anniversary. And my body had a reaction. My body went, it just clenched and I felt sick. And I was so nervous and just in a click, I knew exactly what had happened. I was having this trauma response. And that's what trauma does. It lives in our system until we work through it, And so I think, and knowing what my husband's gone through with not being what wasn't done. So, all these people that say, oh, our family, we're not emotional people, or that's in the past. I just move on. I'm learning we have to be careful about that because we might move on in our brain, but our nervous system and our body does not move on. It does not move on no matter how much we tell it to move on. What we tell it to do and what we do is we distract and we pick up these different things to be a distraction. Mm-hmm. And we get angry at something over here that has nothing to be, it's really not part of being angry. And we just kind of snowball until our health starts to diminish is what I've seen most of the time. And again, from what didn't happen, it's the same thing. So if we didn't have enough attention or care as a child, especially, and there's a great book called Running on Empty, and the author's super nice. I was able to meet her. Her name's Janice Webb. And she calls it childhood emotional neglect. And she has a test you can even take to understand if you have this kind of unseen trauma. And it was just kind of eye-opening when my husband read that book to understand kind of the dynamics he had lived through and was kind of raised in, where there was probably so much trauma at one point that everybody kind of shut down and we just coexisted in the same home. But like Brene Brown says, we're wired for connection. So when you have a still face, there is no connection there. In fact, the still face, they have repeated it. However, they've asked, what they've done is they've had it over camera. So the mom's playing with the baby and the baby's laughing and all the stuff. And then she goes still face and the baby starts to point to things and starts to wanting to get the mom's attention until she starts crying. And within 2 minutes, the babies are panicking. They're panicking as if the world's ending and their mom's still right there. But when they're doing it over video, they would just replay the positive parts and it was still, they'd have the same reaction because there was no connection. They knew it as babies under 2 years old that they weren't having this connection. That's how wired we are. So when Brene Brown says that, it's true. Like we need it, like we need, food and water and sleep. It's one of those needs that we have to be seen and to be connected to a loving person, especially a caretaker. And when that doesn't happen, or when there isn't that enough attunement, they call it this attunement between child and parent or caretaker, then it's threatening. It's life threatening. And we do it all the time. In fact, I once a month, I host in the library in the Wholeness Network, I host a mommy and I call it a mommy and Mish because all that I've learned even raising my own kids, I would do things differently because there's no, under the age of 2, maybe even 3, there's not too much connection. There's no spoiling of a child at that age. I think we got that wrong for a long time. And if it's difficult for us, but I understand I was a mom and like, I need my own time, right? Like I need to be myself too. I can't be connected to that. And so that's what this is about, is how do we kind of, for myself, I want to support moms enough to where I can help them be able to do what they need to do, or to get a good caretaker, or to at least be aware of what to do when you're in your child's presence, but really to support the moms, because, it's hard. So it's a place to say, hey, this is hard. And what do I do? Or, all the questions that come up. It's just a place to have support and a place to learn and grow, but also to be able to say, I don't like this sometimes, or what do I do when this happens? Or because that's just the way it is. And so, as a society, we don't support moms as much as I, doing my research or learning what I've learned, I just think, wow, that should be all hands on deck when a new child comes into the world. It should be, because it supports us all. If we've got healthy people, we've got a healthy society. Our health begins, most of adult trauma is between the ages of 0 and 18. That's where most of that comes in, because the nervous system is learning and growing and wide open. And the brain is wide open, trying to learn and understand. And so it's downloading these kinds of information into this wide open brain. And then we want it to act differently when it's not been trained that way, where it hasn't been formed that way. And so it really, the CPTSD is really, they consider it even a brain injury, because the brain has been developed differently. And the brain is plastic, they say, so we can shift that. And that's one of the things that I loved about learning NLP, which is neuro-linguistic programming. It's been around forever. There's a million different people that do it and a million different ways of doing it. A lot of sales people use it, but it's just understanding the way the brain works in order. So people like with sales, they'll use it to kind of get people to say yes, right? But for me, I've used it in clients to help them reprogram these difficult times. So I had one client who was struggling with some betrayal trauma. Her spouse had an affair, and it was so difficult, and she couldn't get over it. And we're still even working through it, but she would, she's very nervous and jumpy all the time. And so we did this technique where one of the things that she struggled with is when she would go to do laundry, when she would be doing his laundry, she would get triggered and she couldn't finish. So we were able to go in with NLP and reprogram that. And within just a few minutes, it was wild that later she's like, wow, that doesn't bother me anymore. And it's kind of wild. You can do it with, people use it for food. Like if they want to stop liking food, we can kind of so you take a positive kind of thing and you overlay it with a negative thing, or vice versa, to try and reverse the brain's reaction to it. So we'll use a negative thing if we kind of want to take this, like some people want to not like this certain food. So we'll take a food that they hate and we'll overlap them in your memory. And so then it kind of taints the experience of them. It's kind of wild.
That is freaking bizarre, but so cool.
Right. That's been a really cool little new technique I've been using in understanding how, because, when we, to create a memory or to create an experience, we have these different sequences of what we do. So for myself, I talk about the mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual bodies, these parts of us, and our mental body is the part of us that all of our thinking and our beliefs about things kind of happen in this mental body. We've got our emotional body that are kind of our emotions. And they're kind of different. Like if we're having a thought about something, we'll have an emotion because of that thought, but they're kind of different. You know what I mean? Or we'll have an emotion about something and my thought behind it is way different than somebody else's thought about it, so it's almost like these different pieces. And then we have our spiritual body is a lot about these parts that are non-physical, the connections that we have, the meaning that we give things, whether that's, sometimes we find meaning in spirituality, but sometimes we find meaning just in how I take things. Something every day can have a different meaning for me than it does someone else. And what's interesting is when I was kind of working, because I would just kind of get this ideas, this aha moments, and I journal a lot, and I feel like I receive a lot of downloads. What was really interesting was when I sat there for a minute, I realized that all of these things, our thoughts, our emotions, all those connections and meaning, how we experience them is through sensations in our bodies. Like that's how we are actually experiencing, not to mention the fact that our body takes in information from our senses, right? So it's we're having a physical experience when we're having these things that are all a mix. You don't have a thought, you don't have an emotion without a thought, really. And you don't really have a thought without some kind of emotion. And they're different, they're kind of independent. Because one person, like I say, one person could have this thought, but have this emotion. One person could have this emotion, but it's tied to this thought. So they're kind of independent.
Everybody
but
sees things from their own view. Everyone has eyes.
Exactly. You got it.
Yeah.
But how do we know that's what's happening? It's really through these sensations in our body. And I also realized that so much of us are disconnected from our bodies. I think, number one, because there's some kind of standard our body's supposed to have. And when it doesn't fit that standard, we disconnect, or people think their bodies are bad or ugly, like I say, or, will be nice some point, like it's this, my body will be, I like my body if it was this. Well, that's a disconnection, right? That's a disconnection. And so those sensations, we kind of push those away because we're not happy about where they're coming from. And we're losing the way that we're experiencing the world. We're kind of shutting down. And then what we do is we get, we go onto social media and we get hits of dopamine, and that's our new feeling, that's our new feeling. And I hope I don't ever say do nothing. I would never say never do that again, or I wrote a weight loss book, and I never say don't eat that, or I never want to say what's bad, because I think it's more what's authentic. It's what's authentic to you, and to really get to know what's authentic. And sometimes we don't know because we've got all this layers of stuff in the way. So we got to heal things. I talk about that. I'm like, what if weight loss was more of a healing journey than it is because all we have right now is we fight physical. We really punish the physical through restriction of food or exercising, breaking down cells to try and build them up. Those are helpful. They're not wrong, but what if we looked at why, why do I want that? Or what's going on behind there? Or
tell you what, if you can get it over healing, you will be one rich woman.
Well, I think there's compassion there. I speaking with a client the other day who is struggling with addiction, and it actually wasn't my client. He was actually a friend of my husband's, and he's in recovery for addiction. And he's a medical doctor. Like he's a medical doctor. And we were just talking, and I said, I want you to do one thing. I said, next time that desire comes, and we kind of worked through it. I said, can you say, of course I would want this. Of course. Because instead of demeaning ourselves and like beating ourselves up, if we understand trauma and that addiction is the best medicine most people have for the trauma, because it is overwhelming when your nervous system is on alert. That's overwhelming. That is painful. It's physically painful. It's emotionally painful. It's mentally painful. It's spiritually painful. It's overriding this. And so we have these addictions that take the edge off, and we're just trying to get rid of these addictions, and food can be an addiction where we're not addressing the real life thing. Yeah, it's just a Band-Aid. And you know what? For me, I mean, what I told him is I said, good job finding some kind of a Band-Aid. It's kept you alive. It's honestly kept you alive. Mm-hmm. Because if you watch that still face experiment, if that baby went on too much longer, it's like it would snap. You know what I mean? It would break its very soul. If nothing else, it would be a hollow being. You're walking around here. You know, I was telling this man, you're walking around here. You're in our lives. We love you and appreciate you. You bring goodness to the world. So it's worked for a minute, and now let's try something else. You know, let's work on something else. And just that little bit of compassion, just that little bit of giving him some room to not be the worst thing in the world, you know, to not be a horrible, horrible person. The next day he says, you know what? I was for the first time, I didn't relapse, or I didn't. And it's like, yeah, like there's a lot of power in some compassion and unconditional love. That's really all I did is, you know, I just said, just next time say, I want that. Of course I would. I'm hurting.
Yeah,
I'm in pain.
Because deep down, you know, you don't want it. So if you're going to say, I want this, of course I do. And it's like, no, but I really don't. And I think that's why you wouldn't go along with it. Because you're like, no.
Right. You're like, oh, you know, because what's really interesting too is when we have trauma, especially relational trauma, which most of it is. If you've ever heard of Bessel van der Kolk, he's written a book called The Body Keeps the Score. And he talks about how he's actually one of the men who actually got PTSD to be in the books, the DSM-5. Well, it's the 5 now, but back in the 80s, like, you know, for the longest time, it was shell shock or it was just whatever, but it was working with these, you know, really working with the soldiers who in the military, that's what we think of when we think of PTSD. You know, and working with them. And I heard him, you know, he has said, I've seen him speak, and he said, you know, if we could have talked about, we purposely didn't bring in childhood into that because it wouldn't have got into you know, but he says, if we looked at childhood trauma, we would take a book this big and it would be a pamphlet. That's how important those first few years of our lives are. And it's not that we have terrible parents. We just haven't understood the way that we process information, the way that what we need, you know, that we actually need connection. We still have this, oh, you don't want to spoil your child. And yet I think what's spoiled, because I think you could kind of parallel our addicted society. You could call that spoiled. You know what I mean? Like they're completely, you know, you get into this selfish mode when you're in a certain point. Different people are different levels, but you become tunnel visioned because you're trying to not die. Honestly, you're in such pain or whatever, or in some cases chemicals, you know, they take over, and then there's this thirst and hunger for the chemical. But, you know, and that's a side tangent, but there's a clinic, you know, Gabor Monte in Toronto opened a clinic where he'd let people come in and he would give them all the drugs they wanted. He just wanted them to have a clean needle. You know, and they would work with them and they gave them all they wanted. And guess what? Most of them quit drugs because they had unconditional love. You know, there just wasn't that fight against, which if you think about that fight, like that's what's happening in the trauma. It's like you're drowning, right? And so that fight that is there, and it doesn't, and what happens is we feel uncomfortable when we don't have that fight is really what's going on, because we were born that way. Our brain was developed under those circumstances so that stress or that heightened hypervigilance or whatever gets programmed in. And so now it's like, that's the normal level. Like that's what the body thinks is normal because that's what's happened.
Exactly. Just like if you're in an abusive relationship, you get kind of used to that. So say then you date a really nice guy, you almost are off put by it because you don't know how to take it.
100%. That's exactly right. It's scary and painful to have a healthy relationship because it's not normal. It's not normal for you. And So how do we expect someone to just on their own flip that switch and say, no, that's a healthy person? It's not a mind issue. It's not a cognitive thought process. It is a nervous system response. So we tell them, we tell each other, oh, it's fine though. It's fine. Okay. All right. And then they're right back because they're responding to this nervous system thing. They're not having a process of thoughts that says, well, this, and then this, and then this, like that. They can do that. But until that nervous system feels calm and at peace, it's going to have a reaction. And when you think about trauma responses, it's important to understand the responses. You've got fight, which is anger or fight or move into the situation or overpower or things like that. Think about those things. You've got fight, flight, you check out, leave, whether you leave physically and run or whether you just check out, or begin to make space. It's like you make space with the other person and that can even be like, oh, you make up excuses why you can't make appointments and those things like that. You're fleeing, right? You're moving away. You've got freeze, which is, an important one that sometimes happens for us women, especially just freeze. We go speechless, right? I can't even speak. It's like freeze. You can't move. And so what does that look like out in the world? Like, we stay home in our homes, don't go out of the house and isolate, right? That's a freeze response. And then we have the last one, which is appease, which I wanted to bring up, or fawn. People call it fawn. But like you were saying, sometimes in abusive relationships, this is what's really hard. A perfect abusive relationship is when you've got two people, one's having a fight response and the other one's having an appease response. That is going to be a long-lasting relationship that is very, very unhealthy. And they're both having a trauma response. And mostly, again, women are mostly in this appease. They're mostly the ones that will appease. So they're trying to be nice or it's almost a codependent relationship where they're trying to love them enough and it's just this automatic response, not a cognitive. They're not thinking, how can I make my spouse's life better? Like that's a cognitive thought versus a reaction where it's like getting them whatever they want, always saying yes.
Yeah. You don't want to deal with the repercussions. Like
right.
You'd rather just do anything and everything they say.
Right. And so you're having a trauma response. You're not cognitively thinking that you want to stay. Your nervous system has made a judgment about the survival options and has chosen the one that it thinks is the best. And it happens in a moment and it's there for a good reason. But when it gets stuck on, or when it gets aggravated or triggered, a lot of people, that word triggered, it's kind of becoming no big deal, but it's a big deal to be triggered. It is not, once we are triggered, then to be able to backpedal on our own, I don't know. I think it's almost impossible. I think we manage it through things that in other, depending on what it is, would be considered an addiction. It's something that distracts us and moves us into a different place that's unhealthy. That can be food, that can be Netflix, that can be shopping, that can be a chemical, that can be alcohol, anything. And
toxic people could be anything.
Could be anything. And it's a
serial
way to
killers. A lot of those were unfortunately, they had childhood trauma. And the way that they deal with it is to hurt other people.
Right. They're right. And, it's hard to say, this is a tricky thing because I never want a victim or a family of a victim to feel like I'm telling them their pain doesn't matter. But for me, I really think if we could understand trauma, why don't we do the work to understand trauma so that we don't have more victims? Because I guarantee you the prisons are full of highly traumatized people, highly traumatized people. And we just keep wanting them to further discipline themselves with no tools of doing so. And that's the other thing too, is like we look at, We've got gender issues, race issues, that those are kind of those things that they're running around because they walk through the world and their personhood is thought to be less than on a collective level. That's one of those still face things. Nobody's actively telling them they're terrible, but the nervous system knows my personhood is wrong. And so there's no way they're not going to have a trauma response. And the trauma response will only, if for so long, I, in my opinion, because I saw it in my own husband. I mean, he wasn't ever violent. There wasn't ever a time that we needed to call the police, but it was not him. It got to the point where his trauma was so acute. I mean, that's why we're on medications, and we were at the doctor every 3 months. We think it's anxiety and depression, and that was a symptom of it, but it wasn't the real problem. And now, as we work through it, it's still difficult as far as his nervous system has been in this mode for so long. It's work to we're working to redo that, to rewind that. It's not something that we could just do magically in one session, but he's aware, and that awareness of his body and what's happening in his body, that his heart's beating or that he feels nervous and angry. One of the things that kind of going through therapy and working on these things, it's something that you don't know is happening, but it's been kind of interesting. Like when I would leave the house or when I go somewhere, he struggles. It's a struggle for him. And most of the time, he can work through it and it's fine, but it's that deep core under 2-year-old. I needed my mom when she didn't come. Fear or experience.
Abandonment.
Yeah. Abandonment.
That's very hard for people to let go.
Yeah. So yeah, you gave the right word. It's deep abandonment issues when people call it abandonment issues. But what it really shows up as in the world is that in our situation, like it's hard. Like I even still have to kind of let him know when I'm going to be gone, like it's almost, I have to let him know what's going to happen, where I'm going to be, what time I plan on being back. And then he, he'll be like, oh, okay. And then he's aware, he's like, okay, aware that we're doing this. And then he's aware when I come back that there's this piece of him that has that. It's like, he can tell me, he's like, oh yeah, I can feel it right now. Like it's this desire to pull away, like I'm back, but it's like this, they've done the studies with little kids. When people have what's called a disorganized attachment, they want their parent, but then when their parent, they would watch them when they were in a daycare, right? And, they would scream and kind of cry while their mom was gone. And then when their mom would come back, they would ignore them. Like it's like they're having a little attitude, or whatever.
How dare you leave me here all day?
Yes. And that's really what it was. It was it's like their nervous system's going, you left me and I can't afford to get close to you again. It's danger. You put me in danger. And so it kind of builds this tension between the relationship. And so we're still working on that for him to be completely free of that feeling, but it's there. Before he had the awareness, you're just mad in traffic. You're just mad that I didn't, like he would be mad at me if I, left the toilet seat up, like those dumb things. It comes out in little teeny spurts to kind of decompress, but it's nowhere near the problem. It's not the real core issue. And so just by him having awareness about what is going on has been, life-changing for our relationship, able to work through those things and to see those things and to really calm that nervous system, to feel it. And I think we'll get to where it's more of a memory, it's further back in time.
Baby steps.
Yep. And it'll be there. But it's the awareness for him of the fact that his childhood wasn't all that he thought it was. He'll tell you right now, if anybody says, oh, I had the great childhood, he's going to be very suspicious. Because that was him. He was like, oh, I had the greatest childhood. It was great. Like there was no problems. But what his definition of problems were, it was an emotional neglect. Yeah, I didn't get in trouble. Yeah, but you needed to be able to come home from school, walk in the door and have a parent's eyes light up. Like your physiology needs that. It needs to be important in the world. It needs to be valued. It needs to be that, like, again, that personhood needs to exist and be enough in the world. And I'm telling you, people that, I like I say, it's not like it's an overnight thing, but I just wonder if we start to put into practice some of these important, if we all work together as a society to say, hey, in order to empty the jails, we're starting under 5, we're starting 8 and younger, or whatever, and if we do the work there, we will not have the jails full of people. And that's the thing, is like, what it does for me is, then I'm not a victim of a crime, because we have people, we have a system that understands how humans work and what they need. And then it's possible at some point that becomes less of a problem. The United States has the most percentage of people in jail of almost every other country. And, it's punishment. I understand punishment, but I would rather not have the crime. I would rather not have, victims in the first place, and it'll take a generation or two, but this discipline thing isn't, they're getting fuller and fuller.
Right.
The jails are getting fuller and fuller. It's not a deterrent like we really want it to be. And if we understood, I think, the trauma responses, and it could change. I just think it could change.
I think maybe it should be like a mandatory course in, like, at least if middle school or something, like you have to take some kind of healing class. I think even something like that, maybe even every year, like an elective, to help people be able to become better people.
Yep. Well, we just need to, my sister, a few years ago, her husband was diagnosed with cancer. And the second he got that diagnosis, there were teams of doctors calling him. He never had to make an appointment anymore. It was, here's your appointment, show up here, and here's your medication, and I will call that doctor, and we're going to set up that. Like, there was a team when he was diagnosed with cancer. And like I say, they did the work. And then when he passed away, I watched my sister have no team. And yet the impact on her emotional, mental, physical, spiritual body was no less of a major impact in her life than his was, but we had this team. And so I would hope one day that we have these teams. Like I told my husband, I says, this has taken us years to work through this, but what if it was like, oh, we understand you've been diagnosed with early childhood neglect. All right. So here we're going to do this. We're going to do this. I mean, I think it would shrink his healing time way down if it was taken as seriously of an impact in our experience, because we can die of cancer, but it's hell to live with trauma. It really, really is. And so the different ways that people are coping, I mean,
there's girls in school that get raped. So that would be nice to be able to go talk, release, start right then and there when that happened, instead of letting it just fester, because Lord knows it could turn into later. Right.
Well, exactly. I mean, can you imagine a society where a young girl is raped, even says she's raped? I don't even care, because there's that whole thing where everybody thinks they're making it up. It was like, and then we make that a priority to like get her help. I don't care if she's making it up or if it really happened. Do you know what I mean? Like, we need help. There's something going on.
Yeah, because if she's lying, there's a reason why she would be lying about it.
Exactly. Exactly. This is it. We've just discovered a major wound. Why will we not address the wound? We just let it sit there and then expect these people to be full-time human beings in society. And I think it's catching up. I think we have way more traumatized people than not when you add in the things that didn't happen. For instance, if even in adulthood, we still face each other. A lot of times women will talk about their spouses coming home from work and they're cooking dinner and there's this grumbly thing and they go sit down, that you've just been still faced. Your nervous system's going to register that as a pain. Only you have no attachment to it. There's no memory of what did not happen. You did not get that connection. You did not get that recognition, and your physiology needs that. It needs to be seen, and it needs to be heard. And then how many days of that does that happen before it leaks out? We call it comes out sideways. It comes out when your child does something wrong. You're offloading all of that buildup onto someone else, even if it's road rage in traffic. A lot of that is other things being, unprocessed stress coming out sideways, and we don't prioritize that, but we're living with the consequences of it left and right.
Unfortunately.
Yep. Yeah.
So you said you could heal a person just from their hands or using your hands?
Well, with Reiki, or the premise of Reiki is that they call it's Reiki energy. And, I have stories of healing. I think that it's a mind, body, spirit, soul kind of all, it's an alchemy of those kind of things. Reiki is all about aligning the chakra, and you get into the whole, not just the chakras, but it's like understanding the energy system of the body. If you go to the wholenessnetwork.com at the bottom, if you subscribe, you just give your email, we send out like a free energy class on your energy system to help you understand there's a system of the body that's the energy body. And in fact, I did a podcast myself a few weeks ago, and I quoted a bunch of medical journals, medical papers where they were looking at this stuff. And it was really fascinating. I hadn't even heard it this way, but the energy system it's like the communication between the cells and the systems. That's what we're talking about. What's that communication happening? Because the cells are reproducing, they die and reproduce all the time, but information is being passed on as to what that's going to be. And that's another thing. Once we've gone through a traumatic event, especially a major traumatic event, that lesson that the cell passes on has some more different information than it did before. And it's going to include some things that we don't want to be there, some dis-ease, or the living without ease. It's just the way that it is. So the energy system is that communication between those two. And I talk about it in that podcast that, that's what, when we're talking about energy healing or energy work or things like that, it's the middle ground between the dis-ease and the cure. And each individual has this no man's land in the middle of that's full of lots of traumas or stressors or things like that. And if we can work through those things, then maybe it doesn't get through to the other side through disease. But, I do have, my good friend was scheduled to have surgery. She had burst her eardrum. Ooh. and went to the ear, nose, and throat doctor. And he's like, "You're an adult. This is like a little kid thing. What's going on?" And she did have some stress. She was divorced and had a lot of anger thrown at her, right? So we could look at it from that angle. So they scheduled surgery. She was needing to have surgery. It was hard because she's a single mom and she does hair. So the finances, her deductible is going up in January. So she was scheduled to have surgery. I think it was like last week she was scheduled, and I was going to go up and help her. She does my hair, and she's my good friend. And I was going to go, sit with her after her surgery, hang out with her for a day and just wait on her. We just talked as she was doing my hair, what's your intention and what does that look like? And my intention, sitting in the chair, I didn't put my hands on her, but my intention was to send, was to be in reception of healing, I guess you could say, for her. And, I just asked her questions and believed her when she says, she was determined. She's like, I want this to be healed. And I just allowed that to be so. I said, okay, let's plan it, let's look at it. And we just simply talked. And, and of course it was like, oh, that would be, that would be amazing. Like, yeah, I think let's try it, and sure enough, I didn't feel like I said to her, okay, you're going to not have to have surgery. But when she went in to go have her pre-op, she was just still not wanting to do it and telling the doctor, like, isn't there any way this can just heal on its own? And he says, no, we've done it for months. We've done everything we could do, and it's just not going to happen. And so she went to go sign the paperwork, and she just looks at him and he's like, let's look one more time. And when he looked, he said, what in the world? It's healed, he's like, I guess we'll see you if you ever want your tonsils out, and she was able to drive home and called me, and she's like, it's healed. I very much give the credit to her, for her intention, for her healing her own body. I mean, even the doctors, they intervene, but it's the body that does the healing. It's actually the body. And in certain circumstances, can we facilitate that? Can we create conditions where an individual feels, creates an experience where they can do that, where they move into that space, kind of connect those dots about what's happening. What could this be telling you? What is the message that this hurt is maybe telling you? What is that? When we were in ease, when we were living more in ease, which is more just about being able to maneuver through life. It doesn't mean we just sit there and everything's fine, but we have the ease. We're just in a little bit more of a flow. What does that ease look like, and see what that looks like? That's why we love the word wholeness, and we call it the Wholeness Network, because wholeness is an interesting thing. If you look it up, it's both this whole, we're always whole, and yet we're always moving toward wholeness at the same time. It's kind of this perfect duality of we're always whole in every moment, and we're always moving towards wholeness. That's just the ultimate growth. So there's people I've known that they are dying, but they are very whole. Our bodies do break down. They do have to go at a certain point when we have these uncomfortable times, these hard times. So when we have these pieces of ourselves that we just seem to effort through, we know there's been some kind of a wound, and that's where we need to go and find those pieces. And it happens all the time. I still go have sessions, I still have times where I'm not okay and I need support, and to try and let go of this idea that we're broken. To me, that's been my hardest thing about getting clients as people is you got to be kind of on rock bottom before you admit there's a problem, before we want to say there's something wrong. And it's too bad because it's just the nature of humanity, to the way we learn. We bump into people, we have hard times, difficult things happen, and it's okay to make them a priority. It's okay to not have to, pick ourselves up by the bootstraps and power through. I just think it's just kind of like, I don't need to eat. I can just live off of water and bread. I can do it. Like there's no need. Oh, I don't need all of that good food. I just need what I need to survive. Like we're doing that emotionally all the time.
Yes.
And there's just no need. There's no hero. It's just, oh, that's just in the past. That doesn't bother me. It does. It's bothering you. And then you're bothering me. And it's just a different way of, it's the generations for the longest time. It's just put your best foot forward. And so we don't want to think about having our wounds, but yet, man, if it was a physical wound, you wouldn't think twice about going and you break your leg. You don't sit there and think, I can do it. You go get help, whatever that looks like. And sometimes that help looks differently. Sometimes that help is alternative versus just the regular. And that's where I come in. And it's been a hard journey because I was a very mental, left-sided brain type of person. And when I did my Reiki, I told people, I'll never do Reiki. It's too touchy. And so I've learned to never say never. Every time I've kind of told myself I would never, it ends up being what I do next. But it's been just, amazing to see the potential of human beings and the gifts that they have. I think we're so much more gifted than, I'm talking about crazy things that you think are like just in sci-fi movies I've seen experience. It's wild. It's just wild what little young kids, and when we start to ask questions, that's why I love working with kids. Because there's an impact. I'll share a story. I've had two of these at this extreme, where two little girls about the same age, 7, they were at the hospital, at the doctor, at the children's hospital every week getting help. They were in a psychiatrist. They were in a psychologist's office. It was like, what do we do? The moms are coming to me with like, this is overwhelming. I don't know what to do. And in both cases, when they came, I just sat with them for a minute. There's just something about sitting with someone and believing their story. I tell the story. There was this young girl. She was 7, and again, she was just having all sorts of problems. And so her mom asked me to come, and I was just kind of doing Reiki because I thought maybe I would just be kind of a support to just kind of help her relax, and she loved unicorns. She loved unicorns, and she talked about them all the time. In fact, I just saw her a few days ago. It's been a couple years since I saw her, and it was a fascinating conversation. And she's still just this young little girl that just loves unicorns. But I told her, I says, close your eyes, and I just want you to go into that world and tell me everything you want to tell me about unicorns. It was the first time she'd really been excited. And she said, oh, wow. And she just kept like talking to herself, like, there's just so many. And like, that's what she said the whole time. She was just like grinning from ear to ear. And, and I had asked her at one time, I said, so if they kind of wanted to be human-like, could they? Yes. But I love when they're the unicorns. I love them. And she was like, they're having this little party. And she was just describing these scenes of, they're hugging each other. And she says, there's 2 of them here that love you. There's 2 of them here that really like you. And I says, oh yeah. She's like, yes. And she says, their names are Goldie and Candy. And then she starts laughing. She's like, she likes candy, so I just let her go on as long as she wanted. It was the first time I think she went all the way into this obsession she had with unicorns. When we were done, I turned to her mom and I says, I need to tell you something. I said, I have a grandma, my grandma Goldie, who's been with me since I was 5. I've known her. And my mom, Sandy, who, is gone, passed over. I said, your daughter just communicated with my grandma and my mom. And she was like, and I said, so, and several months later, I saw them. I only saw her once that particular time. But when I saw her, the dad was there and the mom was like, hey, yeah, this is the one that came to our house. And he says, she doesn't go to the doctors anymore. And I said, okay. She's like, she's done. Like she finished that. And I said, he just kind of gave me that look like, okay, she's going to be okay. And I think she's 9 now. She's still young. But when I saw her the other day, are you still loving unicorns? I love them. She says they're turning more into horses now, and I says, great. Horses are great. What? Tell me anything you want to tell me about those horses. I will listen. Like we're talking highly, highly gifted kids who are suffering because we have no process for them to exist, and so it's showing up in these ways. But I think it's that because they're innocent and they can tell me in these different ways, but put 20 years on that. You know what I mean? Put 20 years on that. So I see that a lot. I see very gifted people, and it's amazing. It's amazing. And so they do most of the work. I just know what questions to ask and to help them find that truth of them somewhere hidden. We all have lost our way at some point or the other, with some of these difficult experiences. So yeah, it's an amazing thing to be able to witness people's greatness. That's what I like to do. That's what I say I do. I get to witness your greatness. Yeah. And guess what?
Transformation.
And when I can see them begin to become the witness of their own greatness, that's when the healing comes. Like you can't stop those people. When I started and I says, okay, if I'm going to teach and preach, what am I going to teach and preach about? When each person accepts their own divinity or their own greatness, again, that's wholeness. That's full on healing. Sometimes we have to zigzag a little bit before we're willing to accept that for ourselves. We've got to work through some things, but that's really what we're going to do at the very end of the day. I want people to really be allowed to do that because all the layers of societal constructs have told us we're not allowed to do that. It's not true. It's not actually true. Just a whole bunch of layers put on about, can I dare be enough? can I dare not even just be enough, but can I dare be great and just feel that way and live that way? And that's the message. And I hope, that's my hope for the world. I don't care what anybody's done or who they are. Or the subconscious and visualization, our brain will accept visualization the same as real life. And so we can visualize anything, and whatever that person needs, we can work through that and see how it feels. And how does that feel to do that? It wasn't as great as, it wasn't as great as I thought, or it was like, I'm exhausted because that energy's now gone. And it's like, great. And let's take a nap, then we did great stuff there. Then it's amazing.
The brain and all that is very amazing. The human body alone is amazing.
Right. That's why I say, I'm like, it's divine. Do you know how many systems have to work together for us to just walk around? Do you know the miracles that happen in childbirth? I mean, if nothing else, like that's pretty amazing. That's some pretty amazing technology that you walk around with. And yet we judge it as ugly. That doesn't even make sense. That's like calling your computer ugly. It's like, okay, fine. But have you seen what I do with this computer? Like my phone is not necessarily beautiful, but boy, it's an amazing piece of technology. And I have a lot of respect for it. And I use it all the time. We get stuck on looks or expectations, or people are at their core amazing. I've never sat down with somebody and they've told me their life story. And I say, like I've said before, of course, that makes sense to me. If I had walked your shoes, I'd be sitting in the same place you're sitting. It's just okay to be in this place right now. And now we can move forward and we can do something different. We can find patterns and things in your thinking or in your emotional state that make sense. And we're going to keep digging and uncovering until you say you're okay.
Everybody's journey is different.
Everybody's journey is different. And you get to have that different journey, like that's the thing. We don't need to do it on anybody's timeline. We don't need to do it on anybody else's standards. You can say, this is my journey. This is what happened to me, or this is what I want to happen. Okay. And let's work towards that goal, or let's look back and see what we need to do to fix that. And it's powerful. That's my word is empowering. I want to empower people is what I like. My life's goal is to empower people to accept themselves fully 100% and work through the things that are in the way of that. Because that's it.
I find you very inspiring and empowering. So
thank you. I appreciate that. I answered the call to share. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and to share a little bit of what I know. Every time I get on and talk with someone, it's a whole difference. Everything. It's like we go in a different direction every time. There's so much. I could talk 8 hours straight, I swear, about these things.
There's a lot of places to go.
There's a lot of places to go. And yeah. And that's the thing is different people have different meanings about what they mean. So it's like, okay, let's hit every single one. They're all valid. My goal is to find that connection in a way that, when the other person goes, oh, I can do that. Oh, I can do that. I can do that. And get rid of willpower. Like, I don't like willpower. I don't like that word anymore. And it's weird because I like motivational things, but it's like, I'd much rather have the person empowered to be like, yeah, I can do that versus this tension, like pushing myself to do it, or I'm just willpowering my way through. I think there's just a better way. I do. I think that as soon as that willpower becomes difficult, there's a wound there, there's healing to be done, and it's not hard to happen. It's gentle and it's important. Very important.
I agree. Very much so.
Yeah.
We all need to find our own journey and take care of ourselves.
Yes.
Mind, body, and spirit.
That's right. Mm-hmm. They're all important components, and they're all going to look different. And that's okay.
Yeah. That's what makes you you.
Yep. Right. The magnificent you that you are.
Well, thank you so much. Do you want to tell everybody where to find you?
So our podcast is called the Wholeness Network Podcast. You can go to the wholenessnetwork.com. So that's wholeness, WHOLNESS. Sometimes people can't hear that word very well. And then you can catch me at mechelewingle.com. It's MECHELEWINGLE.com. And on my own website, I have this free manifesting kit. It's really kind of cool. It works you through, because I talk about how when you're manifesting something, really what that is flow. You got emotional flow and mental flow. And when you're in mental flow and emotional flow, that's manifesting. So it's a really cool workbook that works you through learning how to get into the flow. And in fact, the whole section on the mental is the NLP. It's a whole NLP kind of like this. I think it's 3 or 4 pages that kind of works you through some reprogramming of these mental thoughts so that you can find your flow. And that's what manifesting is. So that's just kind of my free gift on my website, which is kind of cool. So yeah, mechelewingle.com. And it's awesome. I love to connect with people. You can reach out to me at Mechele Wingle on Instagram and Facebook. You can find me both there. And I post quite a bit, and I'm trying, my posts are mostly trying to be, inspirational or motivating. So that's what I do, not just telling my life, but to also really kind of make people think and feel for the better, I hope. But yeah, on Instagram, it's just my name, Mechele Wingle. You can find me and follow me there. And I have freebies once a month that I give away. So it's kind of cool.
I'm going to check it out.
Check it out.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been trying to post more motivational things as well. Try to get as much out there as you can.
Right. Yep. I love it. Well, I'll have to catch you too. I'll get on there too. Cause that's what I have to use it for. I have to keep myself going, like that uplift. Cause it's when you get down the rabbit hole of negativity, it's mind numbing and it's not good for me. So I love a good positive, friend.
Yes, they're important.
Yes. Awesome. But yep, that's me.
All right, perfect.
Make sure you guys check that out. That's pretty cool. Make sure that you are liking, following, subscribing on your favorite platform or all of them. Leave a 5-star review on Spotify. I did find out that you can only do it on your phone, not on a laptop. If you haven't checked out my website yet, crimeovercocktails.com, check it out. All right, you guys, we'll talk crime another time. Bye.